works.
Oh, I feel better for that.
Click on BBC World News.
This is the briefing from BBC News. Here are the headlines. Devastation in Guatemala. At least 25 are killed as a river of lava sweeps through villages. Italy's interior minister says his country won't be the refugee camp of Europe and prepares plans for large-scale repatriations. Donald Trump's lawyer says the president probably has the power to pardon himself over allegations of collusion with Russia, but he won't. So let's look at some of those stories in more detail and some of the others the media are grappling with this morning. So if we begin with The Telegraph, which carries a warning from China to the US that any recent trade agreements made will be withdrawn if President Donald Trump moves ahead with his threat to level tariff hikes against Chinese goods. Japan Times is also focused on this story and how 6 of the other G7 member countries have issued a statement to the US conveying their unanimous concern and disappointment over the recent steel tariffs. The Times leads with reports Israel is pressuring Europe to tear up the nuclear deal with Iran after sharing secret files that allegedly show Tehran's determination to build a bomb. Meanwhile, The Independent has hailed a groundbreaking US clinical trial which has discovered that most women with early-stage breast cancer could avoid the risk of hair loss, infertility, chronic pain caused by chemotherapy, thanks to new testing. And finally, it's the art world, which is now at pains to show that sexism doesn't sell. Previously, auction houses would have used female models to showcase their masterpieces in publicity photographs ahead of sales. Now, Sotheby's have decided to end the practice, saying they are moving with the times. It follows a similar move from Formula One and other companies hosting popular events. Well, as promised, Stephanie's back. Dr. Stephanie Hare's with us, independent analyst. So let's get stuck in. Now, Stephanie, you and I have talked a little bit about trade already, but if we look at how some of the media is digesting all of this, this is the Telegraph business section. All trade deals could be off, China warns. It's a tit-for-tat scenario, isn't it?
Yeah.
A verbal tit-for-tat scenario at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the way that the US President Donald Trump is positioning this is as a rebalancing. So he sees that the United States is importing far more than it exports to China, and he feels that this is unfair and that previous US administrations have negotiated a position where America is being hurt. Right? But the problem is that, of course, all of the other countries feel this is outrageous and are setting to retaliate. So it's not just China. It's going to be the EU. It's going to be America's North American Free Trade Agreement partners, Canada and Mexico. So as we were saying earlier, the real question is, what does success look like from Donald Trump's perspective? What is it that he's after so that he can come back and say he's had a win? Right? So right now, by imposing tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, that's one thing. But if it's met then with like-for-like responses by all of the U.S. trading partners, and we get a trade war starting this week, that could end up driving up costs for American consumers and potentially hurting U.S. jobs. So.
And if we sort of think about the domestic agenda, the political agenda in the US, we've got the midterm elections coming up. When are they roughly?
November.
It's November. So we've got between now and November. And if US consumers are feeling the pain of, as you say, of the impact of a potential trade war, i.e. they're feeling the pain in their back pocket, that could have an impact.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that, you know, most Americans domestically are not necessarily concerned with foreign policy, right? But by annoying allies, that's what's really interesting here, is that Donald Trump is kind of going for a sort of scorched earth policy here. He's kind of bothering everyone. So we've seen that the other G7 countries have unanimously agreed and written a letter saying we don't like this, and they're all going to respond in kind. And that's going to be the real question, is if the American people and therefore Congress sees this as bad move, how is he going to walk it back?
Indeed, but some have been, just to play devil's advocate here, some have been watching this scenario unfold, and when they look at the detail of how the land lies at the moment, they say, well, actually, European Union tariffs on goods coming in from the US are actually quite high and higher than the other way around. Yes. And in the case of China, there is this huge deficit. Have not, the Trump administration got a case in some areas?
It's more about how he's doing it, right? So we can always look at rebalancing and see that there's ways to improve that. I think that's what's really interesting here is that the other G7 countries even have said, this is about the U.S. abandoning its global leadership position and kind of upending the way of business as usual since the Second World War. Exactly. And again, by irritating allies, that's not necessarily the way. It is a way to get things done, but it may not be the best way.
The Japan Times is looking at, the G7's response to all of this, and of course the G7 meeting gets underway later this week, and President Trump is expected to be there, of course. It would be interesting to see how this all plays out when all of them, and we heard earlier from Justin Trudeau of Canada, all of them are really putting the pressure on him in terms of this issue of trade.
That's right. It's going to be on Friday in Charlevoix in Quebec. And Justin Trudeau came out very strongly saying this is not a national security issue to have Canadian aluminum and steel being in U.S. military material, sort of fighter jets and ships and the like. So I think it's also that language, right? If you were just talking about dollars and cents, that would be one thing. But it's this idea that this is a national security issue that has so offended U.S. allies.
In the meantime, let's look at the Times. Its front page saying secret files prove, and this is in speech marks, prove Iran is trying to build a bomb. The Times is talking about key documents that it has seen, which Israel is using to put more pressure on Britain and other European partners to sort of say to them, you should not be a part of this Iran nuclear deal because actually Iran is not playing ball. It's still in the background busy building bombs.
Exactly. So will this strengthen the U.S. hand? Because, of course, under Donald Trump, the United States was pulling out of the Iran deal. And this puts huge pressure on Great Britain, France, and Germany, which have wanted to stay in because, of course, the European Union and those countries in particular have stronger trading relations with Iran than the U.S. does. They have much more to lose, but they also have a different approach to what it means to keep Iran within the international community, open it up, have it growing, have it liberalizing. They see this deal as a good thing. The United States and clearly Israel think that it's not the case.
So it's a question of wait and see, isn't it, to see how this really plays out, if Israel actually does have some, significant information or whether this is actually propaganda coming from Israel. So we just have to wait and see. Let's move on now to this story in The Independent, but it's in many newspapers in the UK. Fantastic news for women who, many of whom could be facing very debilitating chemotherapy treatment if it was not for this new discovery.
Exactly. So this is really exciting in the sense that chemotherapy can in itself be quite toxic. It's one of those cases where the cure can be worse than the disease. Exactly. So with personalized medicine, they're able to use your genetic testing to find out if you are on one side of a spectrum where you would be able to solve cancer for yourself, to cure your cancer or manage it through hormone therapy, or if you indeed require chemo. So suddenly, instead of having everyone just have to have chemo, it's able to be much more targeted to the individual woman's health.
It's fantastic, actually, because, and this is for those who've been, early stage breast cancer. I was just reading about it because they did a study to find that those women who had chemotherapy and those who didn't, the actual results were very, very similar in terms of, fighting the cancer or making progress in overcoming the cancer. It actually didn't make much difference in many, many cases of women. Which
is amazing because the side effects of chemotherapy, as you rightly say, can be so arduous. If there's a chance to avoid it and have a similar outcome of positive health, it's wonderful. Yeah, it is. It's great news. Now, the Times, back to the Times, auction houses drop art girls to prove sexism doesn't sell. Great to hear more people coming to the conclusion that sexism doesn't sell. But there's this great debate about, grid girls at Formula One. Many were saying, actually, this is not about sexism, actually. There's a whole debate about this, isn't there? Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because the art world in auction houses seems to need a human being to prop up the art. And I think we see this in advertising a lot, that if you put a pretty woman with whatever it is that you're selling, people like to look at it. And we even see that in newspapers. And indeed, these art houses, Sotheby's and Christie's, were saying, every time we give you a picture with a pretty woman in it, you'll print it. Right? So it's also about changing our culture and being like, why do we need to do that? Why do we do that at all?
Absolutely. But it's interesting to see that even, auction houses like Sotheby's, like Christie's, who are not even on many people's radar, are actually starting to move. What they say is that we're moving with the times.
Yeah, it's 2018.
Absolutely. You and I have talked about this many, many times, and we will continue to do so. Stephanie, thanks for coming in. It's been great to have you on the briefing. Thank you too for your comments as well. We have